You are exhausted right now. Not from doing too much, but from thinking too much. You delete the exclamation point so you don't look eager. You rehearse your drive-through order before you pull up. You sit in a parked car obsessively dissecting a casual conversation from 3 hours ago, terrified you offended someone who has already forgotten you even spoke. Your brain treats everyday life like a high-stakes game of chess where one wrong move means total social exile. But you are not just clinically anxious, and you are not insecure. The strangest part about all of this, the exact same cognitive habit that makes you incredibly perceptive and empathetic, is the very thing quietly draining the life out of you. And psychology finally explains why. Psychologists actually have a name for this specific, exhausting group of people. They refer to this condition as maladaptive rumination. That is the clinical term for a nervous system that gets trapped in its own diagnostic loop, endlessly circling back to the exact same thoughts regarding uncertainty, perceived mistakes, or subtle, almost invisible shifts in social dynamics. Researchers at Yale, the University of Michigan, and various other prestigious institutions have been studying this specific cohort for decades. And what they have found completely upends how we talk about overthinking in our modern culture. To truly understand why your brain does this, why you find yourself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., forensically analyzing a conversation you had 6 years ago, we have to look backward. This pattern almost never magically appears when you hit 25 and get a stressful corporate job, or when you experience your first difficult breakup. For a massive percentage of chronic overthinkers, the habit was installed early. Very, very early. Think back to the late 90s or the early 2000s. You were probably a kid living in an environment where the emotional weather was entirely unpredictable. Maybe you remember sitting on a scratchy, floral, patterned couch in 1998, holding your breath, making yourself as physically small as possible, while a parent completely lost their temper over a $4.99 blockbuster late fee. Maybe your heart dropped every single time you heard the agonizingly abrupt, aggressive sound effect of an AOL Instant Messenger door slamming shut, leaving you staring at the glowing monitor wondering who was suddenly mad at you. Maybe you learned to gauge the exact mood of the entire house just by listening to the heavy thud of footsteps on the stairs, or the specific acoustic force with which a car door was slammed in the driveway. You became an emotional meteorologist before you even knew how to do fractions. When you grow up in an environment where moods shift without warning, where the adults around you lack emotional regulation, or where small, honest mistakes have massive, disproportionate emotional consequences, your young brain develops a highly logical survival strategy. Think ahead. Anticipate everything. Map out every single worst-case scenario, so you are never caught off guard. If you can predict the storm, maybe, just maybe, you can survive it. You can figure out exactly what to say to de-escalate the tension. You can figure out exactly how to stay out of the way. This means your overthinking isn't a glitch in your hardware. It is a brilliant childhood adaptation. It is a very smart, highly capable nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do to keep you safe in an unsafe environment. The problem isn't your intelligence. The problem isn't that you are crazy or broken. The problem is that your brain never learned the signal to stop. The threat has passed. You have grown up, you have moved out, but your nervous system is still standing guard at the door. Let's look at the actual hardware inside your head to understand why it feels so impossible to turn this off. Neurologically, this hyper-vigilance comes down to a structure you have probably heard of called the prefrontal cortex. That is the area directly behind your forehead responsible for executive function, planning, analyzing, predicting outcomes, and suppressing impulses. It is the CEO of your brain. In your brain, however, This region is essentially wired to stay on high alert, functioning at 110% capacity, even when you are just trying to relax on a Sunday afternoon with a cup of coffee. While your prefrontal cortex is blazing, attempting to solve problems that don't even exist yet, another system kicks in. It is called the Default Mode Network, DMN. This is your brain's background processing software. It is responsible for your internal monologue, your daydreaming, and your mental time travel, the way your mind drifts to the past and the future when you aren't focused on a specific task. For a normal person, the DMN is a gentle screensaver. But for you, when these two networks cross wires, the result is a mind that never actually logs off. Your DMN pulls up a memory, and your highly active prefrontal cortex immediately begins analyzing it for threats. You are essentially always auditing your own life, running a 24/7 background check on your own existence. And here is the trickiest part of the whole equation. The thing that keeps you locked in the cycle, the dopamine trap. We usually associate dopamine with pleasure, but neurologically, it is the chemical of pursuit and reward. Your brain naturally loves solving problems. When you mentally run through a scenario, analyzing every single angle of an upcoming conversation, or deciphering the hidden meaning behind a colleague's email, your brain secretes small hits of dopamine. It rewards you just for the act of analyzing. Cognitive psychologists call this the illusion of mental progress. Your mind feels like it is doing something productive. It feels like it is solving the puzzle of your life, but it is actually just looping. You aren't getting closer to the truth. You are just wearing a deep, painful groove into the floorboards of your own mind. It is a neurological slot machine, and you keep pulling the lever hoping the next thought will bring resolution. This is exactly why telling an overthinker to just stop thinking about it, or just let it go, is neurologically naive and profoundly unhelpful. Your brain literally has a chemical incentive to keep spinning the wheels. You are fighting against your own neurochemistry. But we have to be brutally honest about the shadow side of this trait. There is a real, tangible cost to living this way. Psychologists identify the dark side of this behavior as brooding rumination. This is the passive, deeply distressing pattern of dwelling on problems, replaying mistakes, and magnifying insecurities without ever moving toward an actual resolution. This is where your intelligence turns against you, using your vast imagination to torture you with hypothetical disasters. It costs you high-quality sleep, keeping your cortisol levels spiked when you should be resting. It creates paralyzing decision fatigue, where picking a movie to watch on Netflix feels like defusing a bomb, because you are weighing 100 different variables about how the movie might make you feel. It breeds a very specific, deeply isolating type of social exhaustion. This exhaustion builds exclusively from overanalyzing the micro-expressions of your friends and colleagues. You walk away from a perfectly nice evening out, get into your car, and instantly convince yourself that everyone secretly hates you. Because someone blinked weirdly when you told a joke, or because there was a 2-second pause before someone laughed. You notice absolutely everything. Every shift in tone, every text message, lacking an exclamation point. But noticing everything without the ability to filter or process, it is profoundly exhausting. The tricky thing, however, is that you probably oscillate between this dark side and something incredibly valuable. Because not all overthinking is toxic. Sometimes, it is a superpower masquerading as a burden. Now, here is something incredibly interesting to pause on. A fascinating 2013 study, published in the prestigious journal Psychological Science. It found something that completely flips the script on what it means to be an overthinker. The researchers took a step back from the clinical pathology of anxiety and looked at the interpersonal results of rumination. What they found was staggering. People who report the highest levels of rumination also score exceptionally high on measures of cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy is not just feeling bad when someone else cries. It is the rare, tangible ability to accurately understand, map out, and anticipate exactly how other people think and feel. It is perspective-taking at the highest level. This means you aren't just making up ghosts in your head. You are actually picking up on real social nuances, tiny behavioral shifts, and emotional undercurrents that other people completely miss. You are reading the data accurately. Your brain is just over-magnifying the threat level of that data. Because of this, you know exactly how words land. You can feel the unspoken emotional texture of a room the exact second you walk into it. You instantly know when a friend says, "I'm fine," but actually means, "I am falling apart and need you to ask me twice." The exact same mental engine that makes you so exhausted, the same hyper-vigilance that keeps you up at night, is what makes you the most perceptive, compassionate person in your friend group. People probably come to you for advice all the time. They are drawn to you because they probably feel deeply, genuinely seen by you. Why? Because while they are telling you their story, you have already run through their problem from 14 different angles before they even finished explaining it to you. You understand their motivations better than they do. But perception without resolution is a heavy burden. You feel the weight of every possibility, the gravity of every unsaid word. The truth you eventually have to learn is that the mind cannot think its way out of every problem. Life is not a math equation, waiting to be balanced. Some things just have to be felt, decided upon in the dark, or completely released. They cannot be solved. So how do you actually live with a brain like this? How do you finally give your overwhelmed nervous system the signal to stop and put down its weapons? Therapists who work with chronic overthinkers rarely focus on stopping the thoughts entirely. Trying to stop a thought is like trying to flatten a wave with your hands. You only end up creating more turbulence. Instead, modern psychological frameworks like acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, focus on changing your relationship to the thoughts. ACT utilizes a remarkably effective concept called cognitive diffusion. Cognitive diffusion is the practice of observing your thoughts without fusing your identity to them. It is the realization that you are the sky, and your thoughts are just the weather. You do not fight the thought loop. You do not argue with it, and you do not panic about it. You just calmly label it. It is a subtle but genuinely powerful neurological shift. Instead of letting your brain say, "This short text message means my friend hates me, I am a terrible person, and I need to figure out why immediately," the reframe becomes, "I am noticing that my brain is generating an anxiety loop about a text message right now." One phrase pulls you headfirst into the quicksand. The other phrase steps back and points at the quicksand. It gives you a vital fraction of psychological distance. It reminds your prefrontal cortex that a thought is just a string of words firing in your head, not a mandatory directive you have to follow. You probably have someone in your life who overthinks everything, who apologizes for things they didn't even do wrong, who carries the emotional weight of the world on their shoulders. You might want to send this to them because they desperately need to hear what I'm about to tell you. What all of this points to is something that matters far beyond the individual. Your overthinking is not a personality defect. It is not evidence of emotional instability. It is not a character flaw, and it is certainly not a weakness. It is, at its absolute core, a highly active, profoundly beautiful mind that learned to stay alert in a world that once felt incredibly uncertain. It is a testament to your resilience. The challenge of your adult life is not to lobotomize that brilliant mind. It is not to numb yourself or shame yourself for being sensitive to the world around you. The challenge is to teach that mind, gently and with immense, unwavering patience, that the storm has finally passed. You survived the unpredictable environment of your past. You are in control now. It is finally safe enough to rest. We all carry cognitive patterns shaped by experiences we did not choose. Understanding the neuroscience and the childhood roots behind them doesn't magically erase them overnight, but it does fundamentally change how much power they hold over you. And sometimes that quiet, radical understanding, the realization that your brain was just trying to protect you all along, is exactly where your freedom begins. If your brain needed to hear this today, consider subscribing to the channel. We explore the real psychology, neuroscience, and lived experience behind why you are the way you are every single day. Take care of yourself out there.